afternoon, everybody. Brian Neubert here from goldenblack.com live. Where else would I be? Where else would any of us be? But at home. A lot of us are obviously confined within the four walls of our homes, whatever it may be right now. I know a lot of us have a lot of time on our hands. I thought maybe what we could do at goldenblack.com is do something here to maybe help you pass a little bit of that time during the day. Not to say you don't have plenty to do. I'm sure there's a lot of work at home to be done. There's a lot of extracurriculars to be done, whatever it may be. But I thought it would be a good idea for us to do something semi-regularly, if not every day, to kind of keep people engaged on a couple of different platforms here. That's why we're calling this our goldenblack.com QuaranTime, not quarantine, QuaranTime. See what we did there? Simulcast. And the reason we're calling it a simulcast is because I'm putting it on video here, much to your chagrin, most likely. I can put that on our website. You can watch it if you want. You can listen to it, whatever. It can go across to YouTube. But I'm also recording it to upload as we would a traditional Golden Black Radio Express podcast. So you'll get this on a variety of platforms. So basically what I'm saying is it is virtually impossible for you to keep my voice out of your presence here if you are so inclined for it to be in your presence. This is going to be brought to you by our traditional sponsors for our Golden Black Radio Express podcast. Those are Purdue Federal Credit Union, Fox, Purdue Bookstores, the 6th Street Dive Restaurant, First Source Bank, East End Grill, and the Charters Team Remaxability Plus. I do want to remind you, the 6th Street Dive, at least, has remained open for carryout. And obviously, this is a very, very challenging time for the restaurant industry above all others. So anything you guys might find in your hearts to support some of them, obviously, would be much appreciated. I do also want to mention two of our other longtime, we call them corporate partners, I don't know, sponsors, friends of the operation, whatever it may be, Arnie's and Bruno's on campus here in West Lafayette. Obviously, this country was built on two things: small businesses and delicious pizza. And I would encourage all of you, if you're looking for something to eat or simply want to support the local economy, and all economies are local, by the way. I don't know what that means, but it just felt like something smart to say. Don't forget about Arnie's and don't forget about Bruno's. They are open for carryout, and the food is very good. So keep them in mind if you're looking for something to eat tonight, if you happen to be in the West Lafayette area. What we're going to do here with this thing is I'm going to take a topic, mostly off of our message boards, suggestions people may have for something I can talk about for 10 to 12 minutes. Hopefully I can keep it within the confines of good reason in terms of how much I babble on. But as I said before, anything we can do to maybe help you get through this, help you stay engaged, help you maybe stay entertained, whatever it may be, we're happy to do. We're in the same boat as everybody else here, stuck at home, working at home. It's just me, my Dickey's Barbecue Pit Cup from just outside of Lincoln, Nebraska. We've stopped there to eat a couple times on our way back from Colorado. And sometimes the cat. And if we continue on with this feature, there's a real good chance the cat's going to make an appearance. Something to get excited about. So first off, what we wanted to do this first edition, I guess you'd say, is yesterday at goldenblack.com, I wrote a pretty, I would consider comprehensive, insufferably wordy perhaps, might be another way to put it, prospectus for Purdue basketball leading into next season. Obviously, this one got cut well short. We kind of moved into preseason or postseason post-mortem, for lack of a better term, earlier than expected. We're looking ahead to next season much earlier than expected. But I did write that pretty thorough prospectus toward next season on the site at goldenblack.com. I would read you the URL, but it is way too long. So go check that out. But what I wanted to do with this first edition of this thing is to just kind of add a companion sort of piece to that and kind of talk about Purdue moving forward next season. You can go ahead and read that piece for all of the nuts and bolts of it and whatnot. You probably have a pretty good idea if you're paying attention what all Purdue has on its roster coming back next season. Obviously, there are still some questions to be answered as to whether or not the roster will look exactly like it looks on paper right now. I would not anticipate, obviously, anybody losing anybody to the professional ranks. I don't have any reason at this point in time to expect anyone to transfer. If no one transfers, there won't be any additions. Even if someone does transfer, can't claim to know whether there will be additions or not. But as is, Purdue will have a pretty decent returning core next season, a pretty experienced returning core on top of what looks on paper like a really nice core of newcomers coming in as well. So a couple of little points I wrote down here I'll just kind of talk about for a few minutes. I think Purdue should be much better next season than they were this season. I think, obviously, a lot of coaches operate under the mantra of get old and stay old. And there's a reason for that. It's because experience really matters. And when you look at Purdue this season, Purdue wasn't necessarily a young team, but they were a very untested, a very unproven team in a lot of ways. A lot of guys moving into much more prominent, much more expanded roles. That was a mixed bag on a lot of fronts. I thought Purdue's guard play, obviously, they were relying on a lot of guys who were relatively untested in expanded roles. That was a mixed bag, and I think guard play was a big part of what held Purdue back offensively, largely this season, not because the guys who were part of it weren't necessarily good players, but they were still developing players. And I think they had to kind of develop on the fly, and the results kind of reflected that. But I think when you look at Purdue's roster next season, assuming everything is as it seems to be today, you will have 2 fourth-year seniors. Keep in mind you had no fourth-year seniors this year other than Tommy Luce. You will have 2 juniors who are in their 3rd year in the program. You will have 2 juniors who have played a ton of basketball to this point, in Eric Hunter and Travion Williams. You will have 1 true sophomore who played quite a bit, relatively speaking, as a true freshman, and you will have 2 redshirt freshmen who haven't played in a college game yet, but did have a whole season to develop in Brandon Newman and Mason Gillis, on top of the program's 3 incoming true freshmen. I think that is as experienced a team as Purdue has had since it had Vince Edwards, Dakota Mathias, P.J. Thompson, and Isaac Haas as seniors. This is a class essentially with 4 fourth-year players coming back next season, and that's a sort of cachet of experience that Purdue obviously hasn't had either of the past 2 seasons, although I think last year's team played like an experienced team because of Ryan Klein and Grady Eifert, and obviously Carson Edwards had played a lot of basketball. I do think this team played much more like an inexperienced basketball team than its aggregate experience suggested probably it should, but that was kind of the way things played out. I do think Purdue will be deeper. I think that I know this time of year, every year, you look at the roster and you assume the best case scenario for every player, and you say to yourself, how is he going to play all these guys? They're all awesome. And, sometimes a guy comes in and maybe he's not quite ready, or maybe he's not what everybody thought he was, or perhaps a guy isn't quite as good, or for lack of a better term, as he was expected to be, and all of a sudden things look a little bit different in reality than they did on paper 6 months earlier. That being said, I think for as many unproven guys as Purdue has coming in, the true freshmen haven't played yet, the redshirt freshmen haven't played yet, there are guys coming back on this roster who have a lot to prove after disappointing seasons. But I do think at the very least Purdue is going to have a lot of really, really good pieces in place to be a good team. I don't think anybody in the Big Ten has more of an upside to improve this season or next season than Purdue does. And part of that is the fact Purdue is the 10 seed, so of course they have upside to improve, but I mean that in terms of the complexion of their team. I do think they're going to improve considerably with experience. I do think they're going to improve with depth and competition. And competition is a critical word here. Purdue's guards have to get better. They have to get better. And they should, and they will, most likely. But if they don't, you have 2 freshmen in Ethan Morton and Jaden Ivey who comprise. I struggle with words sometimes. Anyway, Jaden Ivey and Ethan Morton comprise the best single-class set of guards Matt Painter has ever signed at Purdue. They are two of the best guards individually he has signed at Purdue. And I'm talking about guys like Carson Edwards, Etwan Moore, Dakota Mathias, a variety of others. He signed some pretty good guards, but these are two of the best he has signed, and they're coming in the same class. And they both have things about them that I think can really set them apart and really make them guys who are more likely to make instant impacts than guys who might struggle and play like inexperienced players right away. Of those things, obviously Jaden Ivey is a very gifted scorer for a player that, or for a team that really struggled to score this season in Purdue. I think he plays the game fast. I think he is fast. He is quick. He is fast, but he plays the game fast. He plays hard, and I think when we talk about playing hard, nobody talks about that on offense. People talk about it on defense. People talk about it in rebounding, things like that, transition defense, transition offense, whatever it may be. But you have to play hard on offense too. Purdue's offense is very dribble handoff and ball screen oriented these days, and you have to do things to make that as effective as it can be. You have to do things fast. You have to do things decisively. You have to do things with authority. And I think that's where Purdue's guards kind of showed their youth and, in some cases, passiveness this past season. I think that's a very overlooked element to what made Purdue struggle offensively this season. But I think Jaden Ivey brings a certain edge to him as an offensive player that I think can really, really help Purdue next season. I think Ethan Morton is a basketball savant. I think he's a Dakota Mathias type thinker. I think he's a Dakota Mathias type passer. I think he fits perfectly into motion offense. I think he fits perfectly into ball screen offense. And I think he's one of the best passers Matt Painter's ever signed. This was not a great passing team. Purdue wasn't this season. So this is another recruit who comes in potentially as a little bit of a panacea for exactly what held Purdue back this season. I don't say that about either of these guys to suggest they're the solution to all the problems. But there's certainly steps in the right direction, provided they come in and they are ready to go and that they are ready to learn quickly and they are up to speed from a competitive perspective. Both of them have some intangibles about them, whether it's Morton's basketball IQ, whether it's Ivey's work ethic, that I think are compatible with their ability to step in and help Purdue right away. But the most important thing about this too is when you have two ambitious kids like this coming in who are as good as these two kids are, that puts everybody on notice. That says to, and I'm not picking on these guys. I'm just using them as examples. Purdue's returning guards, in terms of Sasha Stefanovic, Eric Hunter, Isaiah Thompson. You know, those guys are going to have to make strides this offseason if they don't get to the place where they ideally would be. There are other guys there to take some of those minutes. Now, I fully anticipate Stefanovic, Hunter, and Thompson to be much better players next season than they were this season. But if they're not, they will face competition next season, unlike anything they faced this season. That says nothing of Brandon Newman, who is going to be, if everything I've heard and seen is to be believed, if that is enduring reality, he's a high effort guy. He is a physical player. He is a guy that you're not going to have to worry about competitively. Also, he was recruited because he happened to be one of the best jump shooters in his class nationally. If that translates, if he fits well into the offense, if he fits well into the defense from an assignments perspective, not from an ability perspective, he's a guy who can really, really help you too. And, I just think that Purdue is going to have so much more to choose from next season. I know newcomers are always a wild card because you just never know. Things change so profoundly when a guy gets to campus relative to before he's on campus. It's an entirely different game. But I do think Purdue profiles as having a lot of really promising guys who can really help them right away in the backcourt, specifically is what I'm talking about here. I do think Mason Gillis at the forward position is a guy who can really help them. Purdue's really going to miss Evan Boudreau's offensive rebound and really going to miss his sort of motor as much as anything. But I think Mason Gillis is cut a little bit from the same cloth. I think he might be a little bit more physical. I think he might be a little bit of a better athlete. He probably moves better laterally. He can shoot the ball, though. He's big and he's strong. He's not all that tall for his position, but he's strong. He plays bigger than he is. He supposedly really plays hard. Another really competitive kid. I think the two red shirts are really competitive guys who are probably itching to get on the floor. So I think you can see a real bump there as well. Um, we'll see what becomes of Aaron Wheeler. Obviously, he had a disappointing sophomore season. He has a chance now to show everyone that season was a fluke. So we'll see what he does this offseason. We'll see if he comes back and looks more like the experienced player he is. But Purdue is going to have really good depth, really good competition, I think. I think the guard play is going to be significantly more talented all across the board. I think it's going to be better simply because of experience. I think it's going to be more confident, more assertive. That's just the natural progression of time. That's simply guys growing up. I think Purdue's guards all season long just kind of needed to grow up, and sometimes that happens over time more than anything. From a defensive perspective, I think Purdue has all the tools you'd want to be just as good this season, next season, as they were this season, if not even better. I think Purdue, what were they, 11th nationally on KenPom in defensive efficiency. Typically, generally all season long, they're pretty hard to score on. I think they will miss Boudreaux's rebounding. Outside of that, I think it's probably a net positive on terms of what you have coming in relative to what you have going out. That being said, a lot of newcomers, you're going to have to deal with probably a lot more first-year mistakes than you did before. But from a defensive perspective, Purdue has a chance to be even better next season. Obviously, you have Nogel Eastern coming back. I tend not to talk about him with the guards. I tend not to talk about him with the forwards because I don't really know what he is. So I usually put him under the blanket of defense because I do think next season Purdue looks long and hard at making him their four, but also will use him in a variety of roles. So we'll see kind of where he fits in. Wherever he fits in, he's an elite defender. Matt Harms is a very good shot blocker. Travion Williams is an elite defensive rebounder, I think, and you can add all that up to Purdue being just as good defensively, if not better, next season than they were this season. I think one very important element here is that Purdue continue on with its offensive rebounding. That has been a really big key to Purdue's success the last 2 years. Offensive rebounds are huge. Purdue's formula is to maximize possessions. It always has been. It always will be. Typically, that's been about forcing turnovers and limiting turnovers on offense. Offensive rebounding is right up there with both of those things. If Purdue can keep doing that without Evan Boudreaux, without Grady Eifert from the year before, great. Great starting point to have is Travion Williams, who just led a Big Ten full of great big men in offensive rebounding. I think that's one of the best things they have going for them is Travion Williams rebounding going into next season. Purdue should be better, but we will kind of see how things play out. I thought Purdue was going to be very good this season. Things did not play out quite that way for a lot of different reasons. But I think a lot of the reasons Purdue maybe didn't have the season it wanted to have this season are naturally remedied by the chronological passage of time, thus making its guards more experienced and consequently better. I think Purdue has a lot of good players. I honestly, people mock me when I say this, but I don't think talent was the problem for Purdue this season. They were too close to too much for the oversimplification of the players aren't good enough to hold much water. I think Purdue wasn't mature enough. Purdue didn't know how to win quite yet. You look at the Big Ten this season, it's a classic example. How many games did Penn State, Rutgers, and Illinois have to lose before they had the seasons they had this year? Sometimes you just have to struggle. And the struggle, ultimately, I think Steven Tyler once said, you have to lose to know how to win. To quote Aerosmith here in this first Golden Black simulcast of our little hiatus here. So I do think Purdue will be much better. We will see how competitive they are. I think competitiveness was a big deal this past year too. And I think struggling last season, in theory, should bring out the best in competitors. And that's one of the many intangibles that go unspoken of here when I run down the list of what Purdue has, how it fits in from a personnel perspective, from a elements of the game perspective, is the intangibles of how competitive are they. I do think that was a bit of an issue this season. I do think leadership was a bit of an issue this season. I think time maybe takes care of those things to the point where, it isn't a concern next season. I think that's the best case scenario for Purdue. But just looking at Purdue on paper, one would think that they stand to be a much, much better team. Part of that, too, is the Big Ten thinning out. This was a historic year top to bottom in the Big Ten in terms of the competitiveness of the league. You're going to lose some of these great big men. You're going to lose some of these great players. some of these teams are going to come back down to earth. I don't know what Penn State's going to be post Lamar Stevens. Minnesota's already lost Daniel Laturo. What just happened? We're still going. Okay, my screensaver came on. Real professional, I know. Minnesota lost Daniel Laturo. Ohio State may lose Caleb Wesson. I know the Big Ten loses players early every year to the NBA, and they remain a very good, very competitive league. But I do think, in terms of the sheer historic nature of how good the Big Ten was, they were going to get 10 teams at least in the NCAA tournament. Purdue was on the outside looking in, but if Purdue wins 2 games in Indianapolis, if Indianapolis ever happens, you never know. This was a Big Ten that had a real legitimate chance to put 11 teams in the Big Ten in the NCAA tournament this year. That tells you how good that league was this year. Purdue will be better, but the Big Ten will take a step back. So Purdue being better and the Big Ten taking a step back, a rising tide, how's that go? Forget it. The rising tide raises all ships, or something like that. I'm sorry, I should have written that down beforehand. Anyway, I think Purdue stands to have a chance to be much better next season than it was this season. Obviously, that will be everyone's hope. That will be your hope. That will be their hope, and so on and so forth. I do think it is very close to being a reality, or very likely to be a reality, I should say. That's what I got. That was all off the top of my head. I wrote down a couple little notes. I hope you found that entertaining. I hope you found that to be interesting. I hope it was worth your time. Anything I can do to occupy some of your time, I'm more than happy to do. So this was our first goldenblack.com QuaranTime Simulcast. Once again, it was brought to you by Falls Purdue Bookstores, Purdue Federal Credit Union, the 6th Street Dive Restaurant, First Source Bank, East End Grill, and the Charters Team Remaxability Plus. Reminder, 6th Street Dive is taking carryout orders. Reminder also of our longtime corporate friends, Arnie's and Bruno's remain open for carryout pizza. Delicious pizza, I might add. So please keep them in mind if you're looking for dinner ideas. Obviously, anything we can do to help our local businesses, I think in this time, is worthwhile. So please keep them in mind if you're looking for something to eat. So that's what I've got from this first goldenblack.com. Once again, QuaranTime Simulcast. Again, I hope this was worth your time. I do want to wish everyone well. I hope everyone's doing okay with this. We are all in this together, and I ask you all to please take care of yourselves and take care of everyone else here, because everyone else's fate is in all of our hands here. So please keep that in mind. You don't need me preaching to you, but I think it's important people hear that as much as possible. So thank you so much, everyone. We will talk to you again somewhere down the line.